In this video, we're creating a YouTube transcription tool using AI pair programmers and a documentation first approach. This is part of a series that I'm putting together on automating my own YouTube experience. I'm Happy Dave, let's get into it. What we're doing today is taking existing code that works quite well and turning it into best practices documentation. From there, we'll create a goal and a feature list for the new piece of software that we want to write and merge the two together to create a requirements document. With this requirements document in place, we're going to feed it to an AI pair programmer to write the application for us. The journey today is to feed this requirements document into an AI pair programmer. What we'll do is build a CLI tool. It'll work with YouTube transcriptions, and the goal is to work with the command line tool to build a primary component and any sub components that are needed, and finish it off with unit tests and maybe an integration test. Now let's look at the problem I'm trying to solve. So this product called Gling is what I use for my YouTube editing. It's a text-based video editor, and I can go and remove words, and it's pretty simple to use. I used to use Descript, but this has become a lot easier for me. There is a link in the description. Now, the problem I've had recently is that when I go to click on the export and I do the subtitles, this all works correctly. It produces the video. We've got the SRT file with the timestamps of everything I said, but I recently ran into a problem with my network where I wasn't able to upload all the videos from a single video. So if we look at the last video I did, which was on Rails 8, I had to do it as a 4-part video edit, which meant that when I exported each individual SRT file, they all started from the timestamp of 0. Now here we have the individual videos and the SRT files, and if we click on the first one, we can see that in this video we're setting up Rails 8 with the new basic authentication system, and that was the first line set from the 0 timestamp all the way up to the 5-second and 66 millisecond timestamp. Now if we go on to part 2 of the video, we can see that it is also starting from 0. So what we need to do is take all the timestamps that are in this file and tack them on to the end of this file, while altering both the index that's going on, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and the timestamp position as an offset. Now, if you want access to any code, you can come over to Happy Dave Tools. This is where I build individual tools for helping my YouTube channel. And what we're looking at today is the subtitle master, where I've already created a simple tool for cleaning SRT or transcript files. Now within that, we've got documentation and future documentation, which is the tool we're about to create. Now, I took the code that was available here and used it as an idea for best practices. So this is a single responsibility principle class that I've created that cleans my SRT files. And along with it, there's a unit test that goes with it, which can take a simple SRT file that has some tags in it, which is useful when you're seeing words highlighted across the screen, and turns it into a simpler format. Along with the code and the test, I've also got a script that allows me to run it from the command line, and the one we're looking at the moment is clean, but we're going to add one for joining SRT files together. Now the documentation for this particular class is all listed here, and this is always designed when I'm writing the code so that I can use it either as a library to use from another application or from the command line. So this is how the existing code would run. Now finally, let's look at the code we're about to create. So what we want to do is join multiple SRT files together, and you would have noticed there were other files coming along. And so you can see that the join SRT will take 1, 2, 3, whatever number of files or transcripts, and join them together to create a new transcript file with all the timings in place. So if you're after the code, just come to Happy Dave Tools and you can check it out there. Now let's have a look at the GPT 4.0 conversation that I've got in place, which is keeping sync of all the information that we're going to feed to the AI pair programmer. So the main thing we want is this markdown document that is a requirements document. But let's have a look at how we created it. So we'll go to the top, and I just had a conversation on my phone saying I'm going to have a conversation conversation with you about SRT files, and I'm going to give you a whole lot of code and documentation and a file structure. And you can see the file structure being listed here. We can see some code coming on, and as we go down, we'll even see documentation. So let's have a look at how I put that together. Now I've come over to the IDE and I've opened up the files from the old tool that I had in place, and we can see here that we've got a command line tool that's basically a script with help information going on right here. After that, we've got the class that implements the cleaning up of SRT files. Then we got the spec, and then the documentation. Now I've also included the future documentation. And what I'd like to do is make this all available to ChatGPT. Now you might have noticed that I'm using Cursor, so I could do it all here with the multi-file reading capability, but I like to do a lot of my work in ChatGPT anyway. So what we'll do is we'll just head over to a terminal window, and while we're here, let's go and have a look at the spec file and just see what happens when we run that particular file. And we can see that everything seems to be working okay here. But if I clear this out and type in GPT context, what I can do is get a list of the files that match a particular path. We've got all the code and the documentation, and we've also got the spec and even a test or an example file. So this is enough information to give any ChatGPT conversation a whole lot of context that's accurate for the next step that we're creating. Now, having a list of the files that we want is great, but we really need the content. So what I'll do is I'll type in this GPT context, and rather than using the tree format, I'm going to use the all data format or the text format. And what that's going to do is grab all the information. We'll just paste it in here so we can see it. We've got the original tree structure, we've got code. If we move down, we've got documentation, and we've even got a fixtures or a sample document going here. And each of them are listed with the actual file path before we put in the content. Now, if you'd like access to this particular tool, it's in the same repository. So we'll just change windows, and you can see here there's the GPT context, and this is how you would call it with the different files that you want to include or exclude and the different formatting options. I want to show you how I get started with the ChatGPT conversation. So we can see the document that we've got in the clipboard at the moment. And what I've done is put the read command, which I have another video about, and just pasted all the information in. And that custom instruction allows ChatGPT to just absorb the information, at which point I can have a conversation with my phone. So at this point, I just go into advanced conversation mode and have a conversation with ChatGPT about what I wanted to do. Firstly, I had a conversation about the incoming parameters, and we can see here we've got a folder where the SRT files will be and a list of files, and how should they be ordered as they come into the system. There's also an output, and it's come up with a verbosity, so if I need to do any debugging. When I looked at the previous section, I thought I want to change the way the files come into the system so that it can just default to any of the SRT files. So I've put in this idea of wildcards, but then that led to an issue of should they come in. So if the files are listed naturally, they should come in the order that they are listed, but if they come in as wildcards, then it should infer that it is a wildcard and use ascending order. So I also had to have a conversation about how to deal with the sort order. Next, I wanted to have a conversation about reading, parsing, and writing the final file. So we can see here it's got a whole lot of information about how it should read the files, validate, and sort. It looks at parsing, and there's some examples here, what to do with different information as it comes in and how it should be structured on output. And finally, looking at the merging and adjusting of the timestamps. With that in place, it can write the file, and we can see here that it's got a bunch of steps that it thinks will be needed in any code that we write. Now, ChatGPT was having a conversation with me about the buffer, the space between SRT files, and I thought I'd expand on that and look at this 100 milliseconds and realized maybe this needs to be configurable. So I added it as an option into the documentation. Now that I had everything in place, I decided I wanted a bit of a flow chart, so I asked it to create one, and we can see it here. We've got the start, the command line argument, how it thinks about resolving the files and sorting them, and it goes all the way down to where it writes the final merged SRT file. Now, the final part of the conversation to prepare it for the AI programmer is to write the requirements document, and I've listed the capabilities that I want to see in the document. So we've got the detailed specification, we've got the parameters coming through, there's the primary component that I wanted to start from, there's also then the listing of the steps that are going on and business rules. I've said I need composition versus monolithic design, so it's decided to create a bunch of subclasses. It's written the tests that it needs to have, and there's finally a summary. Now, I said I want it to be called join. It's going to be under a namespace for the subtitle management, and I need it in a code block in markdown format. This way I can just click on copy and copy it into Cursor or Ada or into ChatGPT Canvas and start writing code. Now, with our requirements in place, let's go and write some code. Now, I've come over to the location of where I want the class to be written, and I've renamed doc.m to docClean. That was the original class, which is here. We've also now got a docJoin, and I've just put all the information in place. Now, for this first session, I'll use Cursor. Now, I like switching between Cursor and Canvas on ChatGPT, but today we'll start here. And so what I've said is create a new class called joinRB. You can look at existing code patterns. So what I'll do here is I'll just change this to clean. That will be the code pattern that we can use as an existing idea, and make sure that the tools is updated with requires. So we better just put in an at tools so it knows about that particular file as well. So I'm just going to press enter, and let's see what sort of code it writes. Now, hopefully it was reading all of the documentation that we made available right here, and it'll write the correct class. Now it's finished thinking through. We've got all the implementation, and it's got an area which I'm just going to hit apply on, which will allow us to add in the join class. So we'll just put that in right there. And as we move up, we've got AppyDave Tools, Subtitle Master, Join, and as we look through here, we've got a bunch of name parameters with defaults. We're just going to hit apply on this and see where it creates it. It looks like it's going to create it in the correct location, and I'll just accept all of it for now. Now, we've got a bunch of private methods for each of the areas that we need to write code for. Now, I'm going to isolate this out to nested classes today. So if we head over to ChatGPT, there was this area called components file resolver. So what I'm going to do is just click on that. If we go back to Cursor, now I've explicitly said, can you implement a nested component in the joinRB? We can see the code here. I've said the components file resolver, which I copied from the conversation. Can the component accept the folder, files, and sort options? And I've given it a little bit of information about how to deal with files. So I was considering whether this should take an array or whether it should take a string as a comma delimited list. Being explicit and given examples. So we'll just press enter and see if it creates a component for us. Now it's generated code. It looks to be okay. We'll just press accept. It's going to leave the code down below alone, except for this method where now it's going to call the actual class with the parameters and run process. So I'll just press command yes here, and if we go down the bottom, we should be able to press command yes here. We'll hit save. Now to test this, I'll write a unit test specifically for the file resolver class. So I come over to the command line and I'm just saying cop, which is an alias, -a, and a bunch of them have been fixed. Now if I rerun all of the tests, we've got 75 files inspected. There's still 2 that need to be manually altered, but I find linting to be a really good way of cleaning up generated code so it matches your style guidelines. Now we've done the file handler, we've done the SRT Parser parser. Next, we've got to work on the SRT merger, and it's exactly the same again. So can you create an SRT merger nested class? And it starts writing the code for us. So we can see that's integrated. Now we've got this idea of merged subtitles happening here. So when I first ran the test, there was an issue with floating point numbers. So I just pasted that in and it fixed up the code for me. And I had to run one other prompt just to make sure it got integrated directly into the code. And again, this is just by telling it to read the documentation. Now, when I ran the tests for this, they all seemed to work, but when I looked through the code, there wasn't robust enough testing on the end time. So I've made a statement, can you alter that sort of code? It did a good job of that, and asked it to use a different end time for the second content. So we see that coming through, and it's just shifting all the numbers on. So if we accept all on that, we can now run the tests and everything seems to be working. We've got empty inputs, subtitle arrays that are unchanged. We've got non-overlapping subtitles. Now, an interesting thing that we should also look at here is how is the Rubocop or the linting working? And you'll notice that there's a few issues going on. They're detected, but these are not actually fixable by the linter. So what I'm going to do is just go and select all of this. We'll come over to our class, we'll press Command L and go into chat and just paste the information in and see what happens with this. It's just going to give us a fix. We'll just do apply on that and see where we get to. So we've got the change going on here. We'll just accept that and I'll just run it. Unit tests are still running. If I run everything, including the linting, hopefully we've got no offenses. Now I've finished off the final nested component, and this is the SRT writer. So remember, we're taking a whole lot of SRT files, we're splitting them all up, getting their timestamps, and then recombining them back together so that we can finally write the file out. And we can see here that it writes subtitles to the correct SRT format, deals with UTF, special characters, multi-lines, that sort of stuff. So let's have a look at the code and how we wrote it. Now, in keeping with our previous examples, all I've done is said, using the requirements document that you can see here, write the SRT writer file, and we can see the code in place here. The things that it's doing is it's writing out the content to a file, it's formatting the subtitles, and it's also formatting the timestamps. And lastly, it's being called as a nested call down here in the write output. Next, we have the simple prompt. Does the SRT writer nested class currently satisfy the needs of the requirements document? And what I do is I give the entire file, including any other nested classes that are going on there, and then after that I include the requirements document. And what we get is this requirements coverage analysis. I've read through all of this. Everything that was in this list was what I was expecting, so I'm pretty confident that the code will do what the requirements document says. And then finally I just say, can you list the tests that we need to create for the SRT? And we're just keeping it in human language at the moment, and we just copy that information and put it straight back into Cursor.AI. And finally, just copy that information. I pasted it in. One of the mistakes I did was I pointed it to the subtitle master folder in the unit test directory, and it should have been to the join folder, so I did have to manually move the file. And I also referenced the code that it's working on, and so we can see the unit test. It's also over here on the left. Once I ran the unit test, everything worked okay except for one. I just copied that lot of console logs straight in. It fixed it immediately, and we now have working code. Now, the last thing I will do is when I ran the linting, there was still 4 errors that have been introduced in the new code, so I'm just going to copy them straight into Cursor, and what it should do is find the code and give us a fix. So here's the fix. We should just be able to press apply and it will be in here, I'm assuming. There it is. We'll just press yes and we'll hit save. So here are the linting issues. If we go down the bottom, we'll run all the unit tests. That will then kick off the final linter. We've got 142 unit tests going. That's across a couple of other components as well, but now there's no offenses, and this class is now pretty much ready. Now I just want to test the final output from a couple of examples, and we'll have a look at them in VS Code. So the first one we're going to do is just work with 2 specific files. We can see them right here. So we got first subtitle part 1. Then if we go to part 2, so we should just be able to save that and let it run. And the main thing to notice is that the part 1 is in the 3 locations at the top, the part 2 is in the 3 locations at the bottom, and we've also got a timestamp difference of 100 milliseconds, which is the buffer parameter. We should be able to test that out as well. So I'll test it with a custom buffer. We'll just say buffer equals 500. We'll hit save, and what should happen is that subtitle 2 should get added to the end in position 4, and the number should be 6500. So let's have a look at the output file, and here we have number 4, 6500. So that's working correctly. I think the next step is to test the wildcard example. Now, to finish off, I want to take the command line tool, which is already set up for a previous command for cleaning SRTs, and we want to hook it up to this initializer here. Now, if we go down to the current command line tool and just run subtitle master, we can see that there's a command called clean. We can also see with that particular command, it has a list of options that it can be run with. The next one we're going to do is the join command. Now, I've just come over to the CLI script and I've written a prompt. Can you extend the command line? I've let it know the command that we want to do. It's in the join RB. I've also told it where to find the documentation. So if we press enter on that, hopefully what we're going to see is a new command added in here, plus the specific parsing options should show up down here, and lastly we should get a little bit of generalized help going on. Now it looks like it's adding the commands correctly. We'll press Command Y to bring that into position. Then we've got the options that are being passed for the subtitles, joining subtitles. We'll leave that, and we've also got a new help message. Let's go test it out. So let's do our first test. So we'll go into the directory and have a look for our SRT files. There are 4 of them in there with the pattern A91. It's from the last video that I worked on. I'm just going to type in srjoin help. This is an alias to the command that we've been running. We can see all our options. Finally, we'll just run SRT join and it should work with the default options. And what we're looking to do is take the 4 files that are listed, and if we go to the bottom of each of them, we can see how many lines. There's a 300 here, 215, we've got another 215 and 255. So we got close to 1,000 lines. So hopping into the terminal, we'll just run the command. There's no logging going on, so not a whole lot happens. But if we come up here, we've now got a merged file. If we go to the very bottom of it, we've got close to 1,000, we've got 992. If we go and look at the last line here, which is what's going on, we'll just copy that. That's number 76, which is what we want to see. So we'll just restart is happening right there. And we can also see there's a timestamp difference of 100 milliseconds going on here. So a quick recap is that we've been able to create a CLI command for joining SRT files together. Now we used the documentation first approach. We've used 2 different AI pair programmers, GPT Canvas and Cursor.AI. Now at the end of this, we got a library or extended a library, which means we can use it in other applications. And we've got a client front end in the form of a terminal command that I can use to join my SRT files together. If you want access to the code, there's a link to the repo down in the description below. If on the other hand you want to see more of the tools that I'm doing around YouTube automation or GPT agents, then follow the additional link that's down below. I'm Happy Dave. Please like and subscribe, and in the next video we're going to go a little bit further with the tools that we're creating using AI pair programmers.